know how to begin to approach telling this story, but I feel compelled to try. I'm in Arkansas, which is a little bit like being inside of Windows XP. Just a very different landscape than what I've become accustomed to in the last 25 years living in New Mexico. But I was born into and grew up in Arkansas, in an extremely culty, dangerous religion. So culty, in fact, I would just drop religion straight out of the title and go with cult. This is something that took me a long time to heal from, let go of, but I have. But it's necessary backstory. What's a cult versus what's not? Yeah, fair question. I mean, there are various definitions, models, and I would say this group fits all of those that I've read extremely well. But I also don't give a fuck. Call it a cult, call it a ham sandwich. Irrelevant. I just want to deal with facts and concepts. No need to get hung up on labels. I lost my mom about 6 months ago. She was also a victim of the cult. She just didn't know it. She spent her last 3-ish years dealing with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. About 10 years before that, she sort of just checked out of reality, became a recluse. Not from my dad and I, but just from the rest of the world. She also began declining physically as well. It was the cause of that, I don't know what the right word would be, physiological, or was it mental? I'm not sure. Possibly both combined. But this certainly put a great strain on my aging father. And eventually, he began declining. Subtly so, but more and more medical conditions were cropping up. He had enjoyed some pretty good health for most of his life, and not quite so much anymore. And so that began to put a strain on me. I lived in the same city as them. I had to be present more and more. And I love my parents dearly, would do anything for them. So I found myself turning down more and more weddings. I mean, in fairness to the client, you can't really be taking on weddings, committing to them when having to cancel due to parents requiring assistance and or being rushed to the hospital and or dying is a real possibility. And having a photography business that actually pays the bills, and I use the term business loosely, I mean working out of your house, whatever. It's all about momentum. You slowly build up your client base over years and years, and then word of mouth leads to other jobs. You stop booking stuff, you start turning everything down, and you tank your business. It just dries up. There's no like flipping that switch back, like, hey, I'm ready, come book me again. Too late. Your client's moved on. So, I got a regular job, one that I could just call in sick to, or leave early whenever I needed to. And after a few years of doing that, I was so profoundly depressed that my wife begged me to quit and to promise that I would never again take on that sort of a job. I've also told this story before, and I've told it differently. It wasn't just a case of, oh, poor me, I have to give up what I love. I was not loving doing photography at that time. I was extremely burned out and extremely exhausted from finding clients, pleasing clients in order to pay my bills. Although not a smart financial decision, not booking additional photography jobs at that point was right in line with what I wanted, what I felt. The parent situation gave me an excuse to give in to that impulse, to seclude myself, isolate myself. My mom and I are very similar people, or were. Sadly, I now look to her as kind of a dark example of what not to do, a worst case scenario, an example of what happens when you give in to that instinct. And that always snaps me back, or at least so far it has. So why bring up the cult that I was raised in? Firstly, I bring it up because it consumed my childhood, consumed my teens, consumed my 20s. continued consuming the early part of my 30s, and then I reasoned my way out of it. I woke up, metaphorically speaking, because now is not the time to pursue your interests, to build a better life, to work on yourself, your relationships. That comes in the real life. That's what happens next. Right now we have one job, and that is to convert unbelievers. All of my kindergarten classmates were going to die, and they deserved it. But see, I'm in this special position where I can reach them, I can save them, and if I didn't try, I would be held responsible for their deaths. Blood guilt is the term they use. Imagine what that does psychologically to a child. And oh, the repetition. Things that are actually true don't require constant reinforcement, reiteration, in order to continue to seem credible. But I'm in Las Vegas to shoot a wedding, but because of this wedding I had to rush into a camera purchasing decision. Fuji stole my heart for the longest time. The GFX system. God, would I love to own one of those camera bodies, those lenses. Just too pricey. But I love everything about the R5. I mean, it already feels like an extension of my body. But there's this light smearing thing that happens on the R5 that I've never seen happen on any other camera, that in certain circumstances, with bright pin light sources or bright reflected highlight, you get kind of this soft focus look, a scattering of light. I'm not a fan, but every other aspect of the camera I adore, so I just decided to overlook it, because this is the best camera for me right now. But my wife is also a former member of the cult. She credits me with waking her up, but of course I didn't really. If I contributed in some way, well, I'm extremely proud of that, but as all people do, she had to do the work herself. You know, she woke up because she's an honest person, and what is actually true is more important to her than what is comforting. And whereas those decades that were stolen from me, I would have used them to pursue my art, explore my creativity. She would have used them to succeed professionally, grow in her career. And so we have to make up for lost time. We have to do the best we can with the time we have left. So when I left the cult, I tried to hide it from my parents for as long as possible because, well, according to official policy, they wouldn't even be allowed to speak to me anymore. But you see, it's actually a loving policy. That's considered loving when you're an evil fuck. Please stop loving me so much. I can't handle it. All this love. Holy shit. But it's not the individual members' fault. It's the leadership's fault. Individual members just go along with what they're told. Okay, maybe it's their fault a little bit, but my efforts were thwarted because I was just simply outed by somebody, called up my parents and told them anyway. And it damaged my relationship with my parents, but to their credit, they did not stop talking to me. They went against policy. I'm forever grateful. But the damage was done. I'm paraphrasing, but my dad said, "You see kids on trial, they've murdered somebody, but their parents still stand by them, and you wonder, how can the parents stand by them after they've done something so horrible?" But I guess as a parent, you don't just stop loving your kid, even though they're now a murderer. He compared me to a murderer because I no longer believed. That's the severity of the programming, and that was extremely hurtful. But I forgave. And hey, I totally would believe, by the way, if anyone bothered to present some evidence. Funny, nobody even tried that. Wonder why. So in the midst of my mom's declining health, her Alzheimer's, and her need for round-the-clock care, my dad fell horribly ill. Turned out he had brain cancer and stomach cancer. So I contacted my brother. We don't really talk. We don't really have a relationship. Why is that? Well, to put it simply, because when we were kids, scratch that. When I was a kid and he was a teenager, he's 6.5 years older than me, he would bully me. Sometimes it resulted in bruises and whatnot, and then my parents would believe me and he would be punished, but then he would be even more furious. And as is typical with violent abusers, it would just be that much worse the next time we were alone together. His favorite technique became using his body weight to hold me down on the floor and then drool and spit in my face, among other things. Things that wouldn't leave a mark. And then without fail, my parents wouldn't in fact believe that that was going on. So I stopped even trying to report it to them, and instead I just learned to fight back, and we had some epic battles. But despite the severe age and size gap, I was able to fight him off 50% of the time. Frequently I would get in trouble, because I would be the one leaving marks. I think he got pleasure from that too. I'd be sent to my room for the rest of the night, not allowed to eat dinner and so forth. But that was just fine by me, happy to make that exchange. He bullied me as a child. He moved away for a while, came back. I was 14, he was, 20, 21. He tried to continue bullying me, and he got a taste of my fucking fist right in his mouth. And then suddenly, there was no more bullying. But to be completely fair, I certainly wouldn't have described him in this way at the time. I sought his approval. The fact that we had an abuser-abusee relationship is something I only realized later on in life. And after these events, going into adulthood, we had some kind of casual, occasionally see each other, but not really talk in particular, except a little bit on those rare occasions kind of relationship. We were not friends, not remotely friends. But the last time I talked to him before all of this stuff happened with my parents and their health declining was 5, 6, 7 years ago. And I just remember being disgusted because he was berating someone over the phone, some poor employee who couldn't help the situation. And rather than showing kindness and or respect, of course, why treat someone with kindness, really, when you could just berate them instead? Of course, he would be too much of a coward to do that in person. Again, bully, typical bully bullshit. There will be no consequence. I can just be shitty to this person, and they can't do anything about it. And he had this look of pride on his face, he thought I was going to be impressed with how rude he was being to this poor person stuck in a dead-end job. Impressed I was not. Instead, it was more like a revelation, a memory. I just hadn't thought about it in a long time. But my reaction was, oh, right. He's a fucking bully. That's why we don't talk much. But I also realized he's putting on a show right now. It's really important to him that he be perceived as tough and no nonsense. What a weird dichotomy that he has to treat someone horribly, but also have an audience approving of it in order to get the sort of external validation that he craves. But I suppose we all have our own mental illnesses. I certainly have mine. So the wife and I, we got out of the religion, the cult. As aged adults, lamenting our lost youths, all our time and passion and energy used up, given to a worthless cause. So leading up to my dad's cancer diagnosis, I had to be there increasingly more often. My mom was more and more difficult to take care of with her Alzheimer's, and so I was there 1 day a week. We had to upgrade that. I was there 2 days a week. We had to upgrade that still. I was there 3 days a week, plus on call, which is fine. I mean, it did prevent me from being able to work. I could not book weddings and so forth. But it was okay. It wasn't really that big of a financial burden. I was shooting some stuff, and my wife was working. And the house we lived in was actually owned by my dad. We were not staying there rent-free. We were paying rent, but it was a good price. But I don't think someone who's never had the experience of having a belief system and then having all the empty promises suddenly ripped away from you, promises that you really completely believed were true, and then finding out they're not true, and what that does to your self-confidence. How could I have been so fooled? How could I have been so stupid for so long? But these are the feelings I had. I guess it's your own fault, but also you were conned. So after you've passed up opportunity after opportunity, professional, personal, at some point you've just already exhausted your lifetime supply of opportunities. There are no more. We weren't even allowed to be friends with people outside of the cult, so how many people who could have potentially brought great value into my life did I pass up a relationship with? But see, these people outside the cult, they would understand it's bullshit and they would explain it to you. Similar with higher education. That is obviously not allowed, or to put it mildly, very discouraged. But mostly I just regret the time I could have spent pursuing my art and other interests. That's what stings the most. And now I've reached this point in my life, the wife and I both, where we see through the bullshit. Now it's our time. We now understand how precious every moment of our lives are. But now parents need caregivers. Duty calls. It is frustrating, I won't lie. It's frustrating. So I find my dad on the ground, delirious, incoherent. He goes to the hospital. They discover 2 types of cancer. My wife moves in for a week with my mom. I move into the hospital for a week with my dad. But then my wife has to leave to take care of her mom, so my brother comes. He stays with my dad at the hospital for well over a month and a half, and good on him. That was very loving, giving all credit that's due. I give it. He agreed that I had the harder task taking care of the Alzheimer's patient at home. Couldn't even shower or go to the bathroom until I put her to sleep at night, most days. She was that difficult. I mean, she would throw things at me, threaten to kill my cat. If I did go to the bathroom, she would be beating on the door and trying to open it because she forgot why she was there alone, or where I had gone, or who was in her bathroom, or what building she was in. Anyway, it was that level of intensity. Screaming for help to the neighbors, calling the police on me, telling them I was trying to murder her with a knife. Also, she couldn't go to the bathroom by herself. Honestly, that was the most difficult thing to deal with, as I imagine it would be for any son. These are personal details I would not normally like to expose. However, I'm building a case. I'm still leading up to something. But eventually my brother had to go. So, saddened by my dad being in the hospital, alone, I began to look for people who could stay with my mom while I would go to the hospital for portions of the day. Then I started working on myself and a physical therapist. Worked on getting my mom into the car and out of the car. She was adamant that that not happen. But we worked through that. And I really felt like I shared a moment with my mom. Like I felt pride in kind of restoring her mobility a little bit. Plus, I felt like there was an awareness on her part that we'd really solved something together. It was like the last chance we ever had to do that. So, for the next month, my dad remained in the hospital/rehab hospital, and I had to take care of both of them. And then my dad returned home. For the next 2 months, I was still coming over every day, initially staying the night, then I phased that out, then I was just there all day. Then I cut it back, and I'd leave like at dinner time, and then I scaled back a little more. I'd leave like mid-afternoon. But the goal was to restore his autonomy, which he wanted. And by the way, it's kind of a miracle he got out of the hospital alive, also because the cult requires that you choose death over certain routine, life-saving medical procedures, to the dismay of doctors, surgeons, and certainly myself. Like, well, he's almost certainly going to die on the operating table by choice, and I have to respect that. But he continued to be his own doctor regarding things that the cult has no rules about. He wouldn't take his prescription medication because he knew better than the doctors. Wouldn't eat the food I'd serve, or any food sometimes, even though he'd lost 40 plus pounds. Wouldn't use his walker or cane or canes despite being such a high fall risk. But I don't mean to complain about it. That's not the point. The point is, he was making his own decisions and taking care of himself. And I phased my time spent there out a bit. I mean, I was still around an awful lot, but not every moment of every day, and eventually not even every day. Most days, yes, but not every day. Because it's time to start living. I just got out of this fucking cult. I want to live my life, for fuck's sake. So we're talking about long-term plans, and it turns out my brother wants them to move to Arkansas to be closer to him. That sounds great, because another sad reality is my wife and I thought we might have to move to Brazil to be caregivers for her parents at this point, because her mom is now paralyzed. Instead, we send a significant amount of what we earn to Brazil every month to pay for caregivers there. So we spent, I don't know, a week, 2 weeks packing and organizing their stuff, deciding what to take, what to leave behind, and we moved them to Arkansas, a long-ass drive from New Mexico. I agreed to bring them their car next, so drove back to New Mexico in the truck, recovered for a couple of days, then drove right back to Arkansas in their car. At this point, I learned that my mom is in the hospital. They didn't tell me until I got there. That was bizarre. So I stayed in Arkansas 2 weeks, stayed every night in the hospital with my mom, and I would go back to my dad's apartment after that and get whatever sleep I could on the $20 air mattress. That was my sleeping accommodation, which is fine, except my back was in really bad shape and I was getting sick. And that sleep was super precious to me, but I kept getting less and less of it because my dad arrived later and later each day to take over. Which, I mean, understandable, he's a sick old man, but that's not why he was arriving later and later. It was because of cult activities. He was getting more and more involved with the people in the cult, doing the things. But you know who could have come and relieved me for a little bit, allowed me to get some sleep? My brother. Didn't happen. Not even once. Not even for an hour. Not even for 15 minutes. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of a loved one being in the hospital long term, but they really need an advocate. Nurses are awesome in my experience, but also extremely overworked, and many things get overlooked and not done in time. Things go unnoticed. Serious things. And there's like no continuity of information between one shift and the doctor, and then the next nurse, and the next nurse, and then the next doctor. Also, no one will notice when someone's condition declines, unless it declines to the point of near death. But we determined that my mom had to go to rehab after she got out of the hospital, and then it was time for professional care, i.e. a nursing home. It sounds sad to send your parent to a nursing home, but we're not really qualified to be taking care of her. And what kind of a life is my dad gonna have? She just needs professional care. It's despicable how much that costs. $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 a month. I mean, who has that kind of money? Well, I guess elderly people who have been saving up their whole lives, but boy, these places are predatory and they just will suck your money away from you. It's kind of disgusting. But to that end, because my dad owned the house that my wife and I lived in, I had to rush home and we had to sell the fucker. Now, during this entire story, I've had a medical issue for which I needed surgery. Unfortunately, I just could not wait anymore. So I came home. We got everything out of the house. That is, we rounded up the 35% of things that we could. The rest just we gave away for free and or paid someone to haul away as garbage. It sucked. That sucked. We lost a lot of stuff that was important to us. But then comes news that the situation with my mom may be deteriorating. So I travel to Arkansas again. It becomes clear that she's reaching end of life. Except for the first 2 nights, because I was moving my dad out of his apartment and into a house. I spent every subsequent night in the hospital with my mom, watching her slip away little by little by little. My dad would stay during the day for 8 hours. This had been his routine for the last month and a half or however long it had been. My dad is awesome. That must have been really difficult for him at his age with his medical conditions, but boy did he love my mom. Me too, I love my mom. That's why I stayed with her. You know who didn't stay with her? Do you have any guesses? My brother. Not once. Not ever. Boy, I could have really used help too. Just one night off to recover a little bit. I thought it was weird that he didn't want to be with his mom when she was dying, but whatever, I really didn't judge that much. Everyone has their own feelings, their own relationships. I just could have used the help is all. But I didn't get it. Fine. So the trip ended with my mother dying. I came home and did all my grieving and mourning here. Then it was time to visit my dad again. Well, my dad reached out and told me, hey, if you're coming to visit, do you want to keep my car? He can't drive anymore. Yeah, that'd be awesome. So that was the plan. I'd fly down, visit my dad, drive the car back. And I did. Not a very eventful trip other than really nice to see my dad. The wife and I sold our car that we had. I sent the money to my dad that we got from the sale of our car. Granted, it wasn't a fortune or anything, but it was something. I did learn a few interesting bits of information on that trip, though. One, when my dad left New Mexico, he needed a shunt adjustment, and there's a piece of hardware in his head, and the neurosurgeon here had adjusted it to correct the problem, but also said he needs to get set up with insurance and a primary care doctor and a referral to a neurosurgeon there, because he had to get, within a couple of months, the neurosurgeon said he had to get the shunt adjusted back. I learned that had not happened. Okay, strange. He had met with a neurosurgeon, but the neurosurgeon didn't feel it was necessary. Had the neurosurgeon seen his CT scans, CAT scans, MRIs from Albuquerque? No. Okay, well that's concerning. You know what I talked about needing an advocate and someone to keep the patient's history from one doctor to the next? Yeah, it was that sort of a scenario. I left these instructions with my brother, like assuming he was going to be caring for my dad in a similar way. I had been going to all my dad's doctor appointments in Albuquerque, but I learned my brother had not been doing the same in Arkansas. He wasn't even driving my dad to the doctor. My dad was getting a ride from a friend. But I still was not judging at this point. I don't know the full situation. I only bring it up because it's about to become super relevant. But in the moment, I just thought, that's weird, but okay. He also explained to me that, my brother that is, that he had given my dad an ultimatum. My brother wanted my dad to buy a house in his neighborhood so that coming by to assist would be super convenient. He told my dad, if you don't buy this particular house, I won't take care of you. I won't come by and help you. That's a little shocking to me. I certainly would not be comfortable dealing with my father in that way. So fast forward now to my most recent trip to Arkansas to see my dad. My dad wound up back in the hospital with pneumonia. Pretty severe. In fact, I couldn't have imagined at first how severe it would get. It ultimately ended in some pretty aggressive lung surgery. So once again, day after day, I'm in the hospital with my dad all day, every day, advocating for him, getting him help when he needs help. But this time I'm not staying the night. I've learned I don't have an infinite amount of energy to give. I have to take some time for me. I have to sleep. I have to be able to eat, recover, then come back the next day. I did, however, want to stay the night of that lung surgery, but I wasn't allowed to. But from visiting hours open to visiting hours closed, I was there every single day, as always. And good thing, because I caught a brain condition that nobody seemed to notice that was related to his shunt not having been adjusted all this time. Shocking. Not as though we had been warned of this by the neurosurgeon in Albuquerque. Oh wait, we had. Well, I come in one morning and my dad has just gone completely cross-eyed. And I call the nurse, and the nurse is like, oh, was he not like that before? So I make enough noise, I get a neurosurgeon involved in the case. The neurosurgeon wants to replace the shunt in his head with a different shunt, one that he's familiar with. That was the issue. He didn't feel comfortable adjusting it because he was unfamiliar with that model. Just fucking bizarre, though, that this neurosurgeon would, instead of furthering his education to treat one of his patients, would skip right to brain surgery. This was particularly scary for me because this was the point when he had the shunt installed a year prior that we lost him mentally. He had come through one brain surgery where the tumor was removed fine, And about a week later, they installed the shunt, and that's when we lost him. It took months to get him back, and I just didn't think he had another one of those in him. Didn't know what to do really at this point. I felt like this was a death sentence for my dad. During this whole process, my brother would sort of pop in the morning. Sometimes he'd pop in at noon for a half an hour, 15 minutes. He'd come with his wife sometimes in the evening. Again, fine. I only bring it up because it's about to be super relevant. Okay, so my brother says, and I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember the exact quote. He says, "I'm going to be there tomorrow when the neurosurgeon comes by. I'm going to straighten this out." Great. I've probably been too quiet, and although I'm voicing my opinion wherever someone will listen, I am doing so in a very respectful and mild-mannered sort of way. Maybe we need a loud voice. I was actually, hopeful for the first time in quite some time. My brother's actually going to get involved now. So I was there at 6:45, I think. Really wanted to catch that neurosurgeon, expected to see my brother. Granted, visiting hours weren't till 8, but you could usually slip in early. Not in the ICU, but in the, normal patient rooms. But he didn't show up for quite a few hours. Unfortunately, because I saw the neurosurgeon 4 or 5 times, my brother did eventually show up and waited for 30 to 45 minutes, and then he left. And here's why he left, okay? We didn't really expect my dad to survive at this point. His situation had actually declined, and surgery was looking more and more necessary. And my brother explained to me that if he didn't go to my dad's computer and move some money around, evidently some changes had recently occurred. My brother was involved in dealing with my dad's finances, that our, quote, inheritance might be in jeopardy. He had to move some money around before my dad died. Wow. That is stone cold. And then I remembered an earlier conversation, in fact, the very first conversation I had with my brother in the parking lot at the hospital the night I had arrived. I can't be too specific because I promised my dad, so I'm gonna be vague and non-specific, I guess. My dad had asked me how I felt about him pursuing something that he wanted to pursue. I told him, "Oh my God, Dad, just anything that makes you happy, please do that. I just want to see you happy." My brother, however, he had a very different reaction. He thought, in doing this thing, there was a risk of my dad losing a bunch of money. And I'm thinking to myself, well, it's his money to lose. I'm so naive. I didn't get it. But I do now. So both surgeries done now. And my dad, yes, he's in rough shape, but considering what he's been through, he's doing great. So I needed a day off. I wanted to go take photos. More than a want, I actually had to review this product. I agreed to do it before all this happened, and I really just needed to get that done. But I also just needed some time and space. It had been an intense couple of weeks. I had spent every day, and some nights, turned out I did stay 2 nights, maybe it was only 1 night. But he had spent 0 days and 0 nights, just made some appearances. Wasn't going to ask him to stay with my dad. My wife volunteered so that I could have 1 day off. One day off. You wouldn't think that would be a problem to someone who had 0 days on, such as my brother, and yet it turned out it was. I asked him if he could give my wife a ride to the hospital so that she could donate her time, and he refused. And he got fairly pissy about the fact that I was going to take photos. I didn't let my wife take an Uber. I brought her. I stayed about 3 hours, then I left. She stayed all day. I came back in the evening, stayed another 3 hours. Approximately 2 days later, it was a particularly busy day, and my dad was being particularly neglected by the nursing staff. But of course I was there to deal with it, as I always was, taking care of all the little fires that would come up. And then I went home, And by home, I mean my dad's house. That's where my wife and I were staying. I went home to eat lunch. That was the first time I'd ever gone home to eat lunch. I was pretty jazzed about the fact that he was now doing well enough where that was an option. After I left, my brother apparently strolled in for his semi-weekly, ultra-brief appearance and subsequent disappearance. And I get this text. I'm not going to reread the text, but I also don't need to. I remember the contents quite well. It goes basically as follows. I'm at the hospital right now, and nobody's here. At this point, the uncertainty of whether or not someone is going to be here outweighs the benefits of having people in town. It doesn't help at all if nobody's here. And then as I'm typing my reply, I get a smartass. A reply would be great. Well, for starters, you don't have people in town. In fact, I am a person and I'm in town. It has fuck all to do with you. And the thing you're upset about is that I haven't been at the hospital. You haven't been at the hospital, you crazy psycho fuck. I've been at the fucking hospital. Handling shit alone, cunt fuck. So I reply, essentially, watch the attitude. But it's funny, I do know what it's like to have people in town who are of no use. Take, for example, that time your mother was dying. Of all the accusations you could have leveled at me, of all the issues you could have had with me, this is the most nonsensical. You can come and go as you please, but I can't. Fuck off. I said, don't text me again. I'm on my way back. He said, don't bother coming back. Pack your bags and get out. But I get to the hospital and my dad tells me, you have to leave. I say, what do you mean I have to leave? That doesn't make any sense. Why would I leave? Of course I wouldn't leave. My dad says, I can't explain it. It just has to be this way. Can't explain it. Just has to be this way. Sounds a little bit like somebody gave him another ultimatum about how he wouldn't be taken care of unless he kicked me out. Okay, but I love my father so much, I'll let my disgusting bully brother win, so as to not cause trouble for him. I told him, of course I'll do whatever you tell me, Dad. I love you so much. He cried, I cried. We held hands. I asked, what does this mean? I can't ever visit you again? He said, I don't know. Can I talk to you? He said, I don't know. I said, what about the next time you're sick? Are you saying I can't come see my sick father? He said, I don't know. You just have to go. It has to be this way. During this tearful goodbye with my father, my piece of shit brother, with his legs spread wide open, is sitting in a chair next to the bed where my dad and I are holding hands, grinning, admiring the fruits of his labor. These are verbatim quotes. I shit you not. You don't even have a job. Mom said I could have the car, and then Dad gave it to you. Mom said I could have the car is not a thing an adult should ever say. But is that what this was really about? Simple jealousy? Is that what was behind all the years of bullying? Am I just hearing the jealous thoughts of an angry child finally verbalized after all these years? Or was this something more? Was this a play to get me out of the picture so he can have all my dad's money? But the scheming and the plotting, it's so gross. My brother's too much of a pussy to settle our conflicts between us, so he drags my sick elderly father into it, straight from his hospital bed, whispering in his ear, what a douche fuck cunt. Hurt my father, make him cry in order to win an argument. And your go-to move is to take my father away from me. That is not yours to take. I hate your fucking guts. I still wouldn't do that to you. Who would even think of that? That is next level psycho. You are a piece of shit, truly, objectively. And I'm not going to point out to my dad how my shit brother has been doing whatever he can to secure his inheritance, even leaving the hospital at critical moments to go move money around, commit fraud, log in as my dad, and make transactions. Because that would just hurt him. That's the last thing I would ever want to do. So I turned to my jealous infant brother, a scheming little pussy whisperer. I said, Ben, you're a disgusting human being, and if you're not a coward, you'll follow me downstairs. We'll settle this right now. Well, unsurprisingly, he did not follow me downstairs, but I thought to myself, what would a coward do in this situation? Specifically, what would a coward with a psychological need to think of themselves as not being a coward do in this situation? I determined, of course, he wouldn't follow me right down, too afraid of a confrontation. Not a confrontation with a child, granted. He'll pick on children, he'll pick on the elderly, he'll berate people over the phone. But a fair fight, he'd be scared shitless. So I determined what he would do, or what a coward with this particular need to be seen as tough would do in this situation would be wait 5 or 10 minutes, then come down when I'm already gone. And when you retell this story to yourself, you would kind of leave out the part where you wait for me to leave first. So I waited. I waited some more. He never showed up. But there was another reason I thought he might try this tactic, because I think he did just a few days earlier. It's kind of a long, pointless story, but he was gonna jump up and yell at this old lady at the hospital. I mean, already we're starting off bad here. Who yells at an old lady? The fuck? But the timing was weird, because I told him something, it made him mad. But a couple minutes passed, then all of a sudden he jumps up. He's going to give her a piece of his mind. But she's not there anymore. And from his vantage point, he would have probably known that. So, already not cool to jump up and go berate an old lady. But also, weird that you waited until she was gone to jump up and do it. But yeah, fair fight. My brother is not going to be found anywhere in the vicinity of a fair fight. Bullies don't get involved in fair fights, part of the bully credo. So when I came back and informed my wife that we had to leave and explained what had happened, she couldn't even believe that this was real life that I was describing. But we were out thousands of dollars because of this impromptu last-minute trip to come see my dad in the hospital. Who do we see about that? So I have no contact with my father anymore. I do a Google search every morning with his name and location and death just to see if anything comes up, but I don't actually think he's in danger of dying currently. But being so disconnected from him, it feels like he's dead already. I can no longer have fun with my childhood memories and old photos. I ended up deleting all my old photos off my phone of my mom and dad, because it's just a big open wound. There is no fun in looking back. It's funny though, I didn't have to delete any pictures of my brother, because there weren't any. And I didn't hate him all this time, not until this shit he just pulled. What I felt instead was, I don't know, nothing at all, I guess. Extreme indifference. I didn't have photos of him, just as I don't have photos of crumpled up used taco wrappers. I held them in roughly the same regard. So now I understand. There's no solace to be found in looking backward. Only the life the wife and I make for ourselves going forward matters. Maybe I needed that sort of wake-up call. I probably previously spent way too much time thinking about the past. I think I'm finally cured. But after my mom died 6 months ago, I really had to push through some severe post-traumatic symptoms. And I'm going through that yet again. It's a little bit harder this time because it's sort of like the two things combined that I'm trying to push through, but photography remains my lifeline. Although sometimes I drive out to location and I'm shaking far too much to get out of the car and I have to drive straight home. But I am getting out there and I am shooting, and that is my favorite thing in the world to do. And fuck the cult. Fuck my brother. Fuck death. Every other consideration be damned. Because I'll always have photography, and maybe one day I'll even be good at it. One day. When I can afford that Fuji GFX 100S2. That's when I'll be good at it. Right? Isn't that how that works? No?